Hi, welcome to some ideas using 20 fat quarters with GourmetQuilter. I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter, and we're doing a whole series on using up 20 fat quarters. So I started with a stack of 20 fat quarters, which I then laid all out, and in part one I showed you how I was cutting them all up so that they're all stacked, so that we're cutting from each of the 20 the same sizes, so you can stack them and cut them. And then we labelled them all so that we know which piece we're using for which project. We are up to project number 5. So we're having a whole lot of fun, and this time I'm going to show you how to make this quilt using some of the pieces that we'd cut from the fat quarters plus some background, and I've used a little stripe again for the border and binding. I do like a stripe. I think a little stripe is just kind of nice. It makes me a little bit happy, so I think it's a good idea. But it doesn't have to be a stripe. You might not like stripes, you might want to use some other contrast. That's absolutely fine. It will be your project. So there's a pattern on GourmetQuilter.com if you're interested to get the pattern. The pattern comes out each day for the 20 days that we're doing the 20 ideas. So as I said, we're up to idea number 5. So you get all the instructions for cutting and how to put everything together for each project. So what I've gone ahead and done is cut out my squares. So because in part 1 we cut everything and labelled everything, that we're using piece number 5 for this, which is a square. And I've already done some of the work, so I've only got a couple left in my little stack here because we're using all 20 of them in this project. And so we're making half square triangles. As you can see here, we've got this going on. So because we've got 20 colours, we've got 20 squares. We needed 20 squares of the background the same size, and we end up with 40 the same. So you have ended up with 2 of everything. So that's a kind of fun because it gives you enough to play with. It's not a huge quilt, but it's a nice knee rug size quilt. It would make a nice table cover quilt if you just use a fairly lightweight batting in it. And I've just got a cotton batting in. It sits nice and flat. Anyway, we'll get on with these half square triangles. So this time I'm going to be making it with white. And so I've already cut my squares, and we need to just mark a diagonal line for doing the half square triangle. So I've actually already done it, but just from point to point we're just going to draw a line on the wrong side of the fabrics. And I found, particularly because it's white, it's really easy to do it on that. And then so then we're going to place that right sides together with our squares, our coloured squares, and everything should be about the same size. And then we're going to stitch either side of that line, 1/4 inch either side. So that line that we've drawn is actually going to be our cutting line. So I'll just run a couple through so you can chain piece these so that you can see. So I've got my 1/4 inch lined up with that line that I've drawn there. So when I get to the end of this one, I can just have this one ready to feed straight in. And again, we're lining up that 1/4 inch foot with that line. So you can just chain piece them all through like this, and then we can turn around and come back the other way. They can still remain in their chain while you do this. That's kind of fairly straightforward. Then we've got to cut them and press them and trim them. We'll go through the process so that you can see what I'm doing. So now we just need to cut them in half, and they're going to just need ever such a small amount of trimming, but it is worth doing the trimming. It makes sure everything's sitting nice and square and straight, rather than having things just a little bit off and hoping that it's going to work. If we go through this process, and it may take just a little bit longer to do it this way, but I know it works. It's accurate and it's worth it for that reason, if no other. So I'm pressing the seam towards the colour because I'm using white, but it doesn't especially matter which way they go. So I'll just do the 2 for the moment. We'll leave those to one side. So I do happen to have a square the right size. You might have a larger square, but most squares have a diagonal marking on them, so you can use it that way. So what I'm going to do is line up my diagonal along my seam, and you'll see that there's very little to come off there. But that very little makes all the difference. So I'll just take off 2 sides, and then I'm just going to turn it. If you have one of those rotary cutting boards, that's a really good chance to use it because it's ideal for this. And I do have one, but not with me today. So again, I'm lining up that diagonal line. So I'm also now lining up these 2 edges that I've just trimmed, and I trim off these other 2. So whilst I can see that it may seem a little tedious to have to go through this process, as I said, I feel it's definitely worth it. I do a lot of these, and I find that I just get on really well if I've just gone through this and trimmed them all, because then I know they're all the right size. I don't have to guess and fiddle around with it too much, and I think it's worth it for that. Nothing worse than finding things don't quite fit when you could have just spent just a little bit more time trimming them up. So that's how we're going to trim them. So I think that's great. And now, because I'll just mention before I forget to mention it, when I was putting this together, we needed all of the blocks, all of these half squares, to make the centre bit, except for 4. So I thought, well, if we put the 4 in the corners, that predetermines the size of the border. And so if you were going to make this same quilt, but larger or smaller or something, but you wanted to use up all your bits like that, if you kept the borders the same width as the squares are, then you can really adjust just the length and things. So I think that's a really good idea, so it makes it more versatile again. So I haven't trimmed those 2, I'll put those to one side. So the other thing with anything with these half and half blocks, whether they're half with a dark and a light or whatever it is, and I've got the white here, is you can have a huge amount of fun playing with how they go together. So I've done up a sheet here that shows several different layouts for exactly the same thing. So we've kept the borders the same on everything. We've simply turned the half squares around, and I'll just show you in a minute. So this one that I've done here is actually this one here, only that it's done with the white instead of the darker grey that I've got in here. So you can see that it can look different with a different colour background, and then just playing with these blocks is so much fun because there's so many choices. So we've got here, so if I show you something like this one here, is really just starting out with these little blocks in a sort of pinwheel type thing, and you can make them into blocks if you want to, or you can just do them in rows across. It doesn't really make that much difference. But this little corner here would be one pinwheel here. So this one here, they're simply turned to look a little bit like the flying geese type triangles and stacked that way. So you can see that we can have that arrangement. This one is just simply the half squares all set exactly the same way. Oh, it's so much fun, so versatile to do these sorts of things. This one here is quite interesting. It's just done so that the colours run together, so that you end up with what looks like stripes. So you can see that that's starting to form stripes of your colours, and really it's just your half squares. This one here is simply creating a foursome again with your colours all into the point, and you just have 3 across with this number of blocks. And then this one here is as I've done it here. So it's a little bit of the stripes, it's a little bit different in the corners, it's got this one in the centre, so it's kind of got a bit of everything in it, that one. So I just thought I'd show you that idea. It makes up a nice quilt, as I said. It's a nice size quilt as a little knee quilt if you're making something for people who need something over their laps. And if you pop something like a flannel or something on the back that's not so slippery as a regular cotton, that's a really nice snuggly little knee quilt. Or just keep it with a fairly thin batting in, great on a table, great on a couch, great on a wall, great on the floor, great for the baby. Oh, this quilt can be used for so many things. And really, there's 6 different designs just sitting there waiting to happen, all with the same pieces. So the half square triangle is such a versatile piece that it's so good to have something like that. So I just thought I would show you that. I've got my borders and things ready For my quilt here, I've got my narrow stripe and I've got the wider white, and then I've got my binding to put this one together. You might have some different colours in mind, but to use up the 20 fat quarter pieces like this is just great because we've got choices within choices. So I will see you again. That was idea number 5, and I will be back with idea number 6.